We always talk about Bloomberg loves data. So we want to start setting the stage, giving us context on the topic with some numbers and statistics. Shall we start with Nicole?
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Nicole Denholder, and really my big focus is on women and their money through both my businesses. So with a focus on entrepreneurs and fundraising, and then on financial literacy for women. So that's why I'm really interested in the data that we've got. So I'm going to just quickly walk through a couple of sets of data that we kind of look at to set the stage as to why it's such an important topic, but also such a great opportunity. I really want to emphasize we just look at this as an opportunity. So if we look at the female founders in terms of their fundraising success, so if you look at PitchBook data from 2022, only in the US, we'll start with the US, only 2% of fundraising goes to all female-led businesses. That drops down to 0.9 when you look across at Europe. If you go across to Australia, that's 3% coming out of their startup report. And if you move and look at mixed gender teams, you're around that 10% in Australia up to around 16.5% in the US. So you kind of got this aspect of women are not fundraising that much. There was a recent JP Morgan private bank report that shows that nearly 15,000 companies across 12 markets in APAC are identified as high growth, and only 848 companies, or 5.7%, are women-powered. So what we're seeing is that there's a real link between the fact that we need more funding going to women. We can then be seeing more women in those high-powered, the funding cycle. We want to get them into that funding cycle a lot more. And in that same report from JP Morgan, one positive has been seen an increase in the number of funding that goes to women. On average, a raise has gone from $10 million to over $40 million, particularly. So that's great news. We want to have some good news in this environment. If we just look at funding led by women, so actually fundraising in terms of VC space, just in the first quarter of this year in the US, again, according to PitchBook, male-led funds have raised $11.7 billion, where women-led funds have raised $100 million. So it's a vast difference in terms of the money being raised by women to deploy. And in total for 2022, that was $170.8 billion by male-led funds versus, or all other funds, I should say, versus $2.4 billion led by women-led funds. So again, big gap there. And in Australia, only 1 in 3 venture capital firms have invested in a female-led business in the past year. And if we look specifically at Asia, there was a Deal Street Asia report that came out, and there are no female investment decision makers at 77% of venture capital firms across Southeast Asia. So we, again, don't have a lot of female representation there. But some good news in Asia is that we've seen the biggest increase in gender lens investment funds since 2017. So over 70% of GLI funds here in Asia have come up since 2017. So that's some good news. I just want to finish off before we move on, just looking at women and their personal money. Again, the world's 51% of women, but they only control a third of the wealth. Women live longer, they hold more cash, they retire with less, unfortunately. So we're seeing a bit of a cycle that is repetitive. But according to Oliver Wyman, there was a report that showed that there's a $700 billion global revenue opportunity in better serving women as customers. So it's a great number to focus on. So that's why we look at those opportunities. And at our own company, Sophia, we did an informal survey recently across Hong Kong and Singapore. And 96% of our respondents want to improve their financial knowledge. So it's great. So there's an interest there from women in learning. 55% of respondents get their financial information from family or friends. So they're not really looking at externally for that. So there's an opportunity there. And 82% of women want to learn more about investing and wealth management. So just kind of setting the scene of the opportunities and the statistics there.
Wow, this is great. It's good to know there's some good news in those statistics that you talk about. Lena, anything to add?
Okay, so hi everyone, good afternoon. My focus will be more about recruitment, retentions, and returnship. for women in our industry. So as we just, like what Nicole mentioned, 51% of the population is female. We actually see gender parity at the entry level in Hong Kong. So look at some statistic in 2021 in the financial service industry. We had about 432K female working in the industry. And for men, we have about 430,000. But if you look at the median salary, monthly salary of these two groups, you actually see quite a bit of gap. The median salary is 19,800 for female and is 24,000 for male. So we see a gap there. And even if we look at beyond just the entry level, you then see the numbers actually widen. At the entry level, it's 51, 52%. According to PwC report in 2021, the gap become wider. The female is only 29% of the management. So we wonder, like, what happened? Like, why we see less women as we progress further in the career path? One would assume it would be, gut feeling, unconscious bias. Other would see as possibilities of family obligations. But we might want to also see what sort of job functions these people engage in. And so I think we still largely being stereotyped that female, even if they have well-qualified educations, will be handling roles such as client-facing, compliance, or operation, where you can see the male are still dominating more the fintech, investment, or trading roles. So that's some of the observations that we see in the industry. And in terms of retaining the female talents in the industry, we actually see a report from the Equal Opportunity Commissions in 2018. So I hope they will do a newer one. A lot of women actually spot in the first 12 months after they return to work from maternity leave, 22% of them face discriminations during the pregnancy or maternity leave. And then 15% face discrimination against promotion. And about 35% indicated that they notice impolite behavior. And so we might have some good news, as we all know, since we have all the financial service practitioners here, that the Hong Kong Exchange has implemented and have the listed companies to have at least one female or opposite sex directors to be among the board of directors by the end of 2024. But recently, the American Chamber of Commerce Women of Influence actually ran a survey of 200 professionals. And interestingly, about 54% of the respondents indicate that this requirement will not result in gender diversity on the board. So from the sound of it, I hope I didn't finish with a very negative note, but there seems to be a lot we need to do.
Yeah, definitely. And let's go beyond the numbers. And how about we also want to focus on the solutions? And we lay out some of the issues that women face at workplace and in terms of wealth creation. And we should talk about life priorities at the same time. I know some women might not prioritize wealth creation or management at the top of their list. So how should we tackle that as financial planners or private wealth bankers? Any thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, we often talk about this, that in life, things drop to the bottom of the list. And unfortunately, things like budgeting, looking at your money, can for many women drop to the bottom because there's things that are inflexible in your life. There are things like children in your life. There is work. There's things that are inflexible. But sometimes just looking at what you need to do financially can continually go down. So that's what we have found at Sophia, is that what we've really looked at, and when we've talked to women, is looking at how to engage them in a way that kind of convinces them to bring that up, right? And part of that is things like using digital education. Women are very busy. And so letting them work at their own pace is one of those ways of engaging with them in topics that are meaningful around money in their life, their children, their retirement, their relationships, the introduction to investing. So we really look at that. The fact is, women like community. And one of the biggest challenges is that women aren't networked enough, whether they are looking at that from fundraising for their business or just generally even looking at their corporate environment, there's a need to network further. But actually there's an extension of that into women like to work in a community, learn in a community. So what we've really seen is this power of using cohort mechanisms to bring women together, and you together bring that up. And we've just launched a program with JP Morgan's private bank. And part of that is bringing together digital education. It's bringing together kind of masterclasses and people together to learn with objectives in mind. Because where we've seen, even working with HSBC and Cartier Women's Initiative, when you run them in a programmatic way, year in, year out, you're just seeing such great results in terms of either the founders coming through those programs or the women learning and starting to focus on their financial situation. I would just say trust is really important as well. That's a big one. But we can educate as much as we want, but part of it's how do you move them to actually doing something with that. And that's where I think that community element, that trust element, and that looking at where people are in their life cycle as kind of as a micro persona is really important to then talk to them with the voice that appeals to them.
And Lena, you have first-hand experience coaching female leaders. So in terms of like grooming the next generation, like what's your take on it? And also like in terms of financial literacy, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my focus is on next generations. And if you look at even up to today, when you look at our younger women, there's still perceptions that men tend to be outside and women tend to be inside. You know, there's a saying in Chinese. And we don't normally talk about money, even for those of us who are studying finance or working in finance. It's funny how we assume or being assume that men are the ones that gather and talk about investment stocks and properties, and women gather to talk about other topics. And so there are just not enough talk, like what Nicole mentioned. And I think the solution is really to have the right female role model, so that there is the trust level that they feel like they can talk about things that they may not be really knowledgeable at this stage about. And so one example that we at Womentors, when we do events for our clients, that is a ESG challenge for university female young women. And the winning team got the chance to have a dinner with the portfolio manager who helped us work on that challenge. And interestingly, the portfolio manager asked that young woman, who was already a winner of the challenge, what she wants to do. And she said she wants to go into portfolio management. And the portfolio management manager then asked her, well, then have you ever invest? And she said, no. Of course, she's about 19 or 20 years old, but still we can see there's that lack of opportunity for the young women to either she's scared or she doesn't have enough resources or tools to learn how to invest. And it is someone who is at the top universities here in Hong Kong studying finance. So other than that, of course, I hope at any education system, if we can have some financial literacy program for our students, that would be amazing. But unfortunately, it still rely on mostly the parents and the family, teaching their next generation on that. But last but not least, of course, a lot of mentorship is important for the young women to be able to share their challenges and talk to someone with a bit more experience and be able to find their path. So either in the career, in the financial management. Speaking
of mentorship, I think one important part is about the messaging in job ads or some of the sessions that you held. I think Nicole touched on something about pitching. I know the word pitching can be a bit intimidating for some of the female entrepreneurs. What's the experience that both of you can share? Like, what's the right messaging or the better messaging to attract female talent?
Well, I think, the use of marketing and the words we use is so important. So, for example, if we run a pitching event versus a mentoring event, we have so many more women sign up to join a mentoring event than a pitching event. We really struggle to kind of, the women that turn up are great, but we want to see more. But when we have a mentoring event, we see great women as well, but we just see a lot more. And, one of the other challenges is a high proportion of women are sole founders. That's high investment risk, right? So key person risk. There's a lot of need for women where they're looking. The reason they're looking for that mentoring is they're actually looking for that advisory support. They're looking for someone who can, get them out of their own head, I suppose, but they're looking for that more advice that they're not getting, because when you're a sole founder, you're in that business day in, day out. You've got your ups, you've got your downs. It's a constant battle. And so looking for that advisor support is ultimately what they're looking for. And sometimes they kind of look at fundraising sometimes as that answer, but I think they're very intertwined there. The other issue where we see women struggle with fundraising is that predominantly a lot of investment is done through warm referrals. We've already talked about women not having a network. And so if they're not in this warm referral cycle, and I've read websites from investors that will say, if you cannot if you cannot find me in a different way for me to get investment from me, then you're not a very good entrepreneur. Now, to me, that smacks of stalking versus necessarily going out and saying I'm a good entrepreneur or not because I can get to that person. So that's a warm referral issue. We've got a lot of that where you're not seeing women where you expect to see them. And so we always say there's a party going on. They're not at your party, they're at ours, because we're seeing amazing companies through our businesses. And so they are out there. It's just we've got to look at the way that they're coming up in the system, because they're not at pitching, they're not in the warm referral cycle, which is where you find a lot of the businesses that are being invested in, which links back to why our numbers are so low.
The important cohort, right? So that's what Lena also mentioned. Anything like you've done like that is successful in terms of grooming or getting like a good cohort for female leaders?
Yeah, I think when it comes to a job post, for example, if any one of you is hiring, please bear in mind that there's statistics showing women tends to see the ad and only apply when they have 100% match. Yeah. I literally refer someone trying to convince her to apply to a job, and she asked me if Chinese is a must. And I look at the ad, I'm like, yeah, but it's at the lowest of the list, so maybe it's not as high of a priority. Why don't you just give it a shot? But we all know that in general, no offense for the gentleman in the room, but men tend to just apply when they have about 70 or even someone said like 30% matching the criteria listed on the job ad. So for those of you who are hiring, I urge that if you don't think the criteria is really a must, please don't put a must there, because you end up losing talents that can contribute. In terms of like bringing more women back to work, I of course like to urge all of you to also, when you hire, please come up with more innovative offerings if you really want to attract different talents. And I hope that ESG is not just a tick-the-box exercise, and you really truly see the business case for bringing more diverse talents into the workplace. By bringing more diverse talents into the workplace, then you need to, for example, offer something like job sharing, which is rarely found in Hong Kong, and where two individuals will be sharing the same positions and of course splitting the salary, but then you end up providing more job opportunities to more people, and you actually have two brains instead of one in the job. And also providing a work-based, that's my dream, to have companies to provide work-based childcare facility. There are actually, as far as I know, only two existing in Hong Kong. And so it's definitely giving a lot of women that's good peace of mind to go to work when they know that the child is just at the facilities downstairs. And it also gives both the men and the women better access to be able to leave work on time to pick up the child, and then go home, settle the child, and then go back to work. I think if there's one good side product or side effects from pandemic, is that all of us appreciate having a bit of a personal life. Before COVID, we all talk about work-life balance, and now I think we all talk about how work-life blending together. We all remember, the last Zoom we had, seeing a pet crossing the screen or the child, stepping in the room. So there are more empathy and understanding at the workplace, which is also very important for both women and men to really have, a life outside of our work.
I can definitely relate to the childcare piece. So in terms of getting, I think we can change the topic a little bit about starting a business. I think we touched on that. But at the same time, in terms of getting funding and advice, it's still difficult. Besides like having a cohort or a mentorship, what else? Like you two have like platforms, fundraising platforms, and so on. What are the challenges some of the female entrepreneurs have encountered, and what are the advice or solutions for them in terms of getting those their business started?
I think we've already mentioned one, but probably two is the kind of the warm referral cycle. I think the other one is obviously a lot of female founders are sole founders. So there's obviously and understandably from an investment perspective, there are concerns around that. So it's not like that should be negated at all, but there are ways to discuss that, and we talk to founders about that. There's some great research that's come out of London about prevention versus promotion questions. We actually work with investors, and we've done some training with investors, as well as helping women reframe this, but it's all around the way pitches are conducted, the way women answer them are in a very prevention-based manner. So it's very risk mitigation. And therefore, when you're listening to someone pitch, when you're thinking about investing with someone, you are looking at their data, but you're looking at that founder, you're looking for the dream, you're looking for that FOMO. You're seeing a lot of businesses each week, each day that you might invest in. And if that founder is very much talking about, well, I've got to achieve this before I do that, the prevention-based way of answering questions very much negates that kind of this founder is capable. And there's a lot of great research that shows when you remove the gender lens from that, it's all based on the way the questioning is done. So there's opportunities for everyone to relearn. So we actually talk to women and we help them reframe, a bit like media training on how do you answer questions, because this is a slow change, we'll be honest about that. But then it's great when we meet some amazing investors who are really interested in understanding how can we bring that into the team and talk about the way we do our questioning and kind of take that into the discussions we have. So that's really great. I think for women, what we also focus a lot on, and it really links into the whole conversation today, is the financial story. Women love building businesses that have impact. Women love investing in companies that make impact. There's a real drive in there. So one of the things when we talk to women, it's around we've got to move away from the problem, the solution, why you love this. So actually, let's look at the financial data, what makes this a good investment. And so that's where we focus, at Next Chapter, a lot more on the investment literacy. So it's not so much, of course, you can capture, basic data in your business, but how do you take that forward and use that to talk to an investor and make funding decisions around whether you need some additional working capital, for example. And then at Sophia, we really bring that financial literacy discussion to life through the way we deliver our courses. So we really have a lot of female experts that come in. The majority are female. We've had a lot of compliments around even the backgrounds we use, very thoughtful in our videos, because we're really appealing to women, the branding we use, the terminology we're using. And so we're really proud of that because we put so much thought into that. Particularly one of my co-founders here, Christine Yu, really was a driver behind the way the business looks. And I think that's a fantastic thing. So we've really taken a lot of time around that.
Nina, anything to add?
I really want to urge the male allies in the room to show more support and take more family responsibilities, whether you are married or not. I'm sure we have any sort of family obligation with the children, with your parents, and even show that level of a commitment at work. We all know, it's actually happening in Asia quite often, that despite the fact that men are given the right to have paternity leave, they don't necessarily like to take the leave. And so if for those in HR, then also can consider giving more flexibilities. Oftentimes, I remember my husband, when I gave birth, he mentioned that he felt like he had no use at home. Because we have the confinement lady, we have my mom, and then we have the migrant worker helping. But that him being present there is important. And also later on, as the child gets a bit older, then you can share more responsibility. So please bear in mind, you can also take up some role at home.
So there are big things we can do, but they're also being present. I think that's the important piece of, being the supportive to female in business, in startups, at the workplace. Any final thoughts? We have about 30 seconds.
For me, it's always around this is an opportunity. We've shared some statistics that show there's a need there. There's a need to talk to women in so many ways around money. And when you look at younger women, they defer their control of money to their husbands, which, you know, they don't, because they feel a lack of confidence, but most people in their 20s don't know how to invest. That's something that comes with age and time. So I think there's a real opportunity to engage with women very openly on this, and don't be nervous about that. Just, you know, there's so much opportunity to really go out and talk to women openly.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Nina. Thank you so much.